Imagine walking back into the house you've spent 15 years turning into a sanctuary, only to find it smelling like a brewery, with high-end designer sofas covered in mysterious stains, and a literal stranger passed out in your bathtub. I stood there, frozen in my own foyer, watching 3 years of my life savings essentially being lit on fire by a group of entitled teenagers who thought my home was their private playground. I'm still shaking as I type this, and I honestly need to know from you all. Did I go too far in how I handled the aftermath? Or would you have burned every bridge just like I did? Tell me, if someone systematically destroyed your most prized possession and laughed in your face while doing it, would you have sought justice or just let it go for the sake of peace? This whole nightmare started about 6 months ago. My name is Sarah, and I've worked as a freelance interior designer for over a decade. 3 years ago, I finally bought my dream fixer-upper in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. I poured every spare cent and every ounce of my energy into renovating it. I'm talking custom marble countertops, vintage hardwood flooring that I hand-polished, and a collection of rare art pieces I'd scouted from across the globe. Because my work takes me away for long stretches, sometimes months at a time for international projects, I decided to list the house on Airbnb. I was incredibly picky. I only accepted guests with 5-star ratings, I had a strict no parties policy, and I had a Ring doorbell camera and a noise monitoring system installed to ensure everything stayed respectful. For a year, it was perfect. I met lovely couples and quiet professionals. But then came the group that changed everything. A woman named Mrs. H booked the house for a week. Her profile was pristine. She claimed she was a corporate executive visiting for a conference and wanted a quiet place to work. She paid the premium price without a single question. I was headed to Italy for a 3-week project, so the timing was ideal. I checked my Ring camera on the first day and saw a middle-aged woman checking in. She looked professional, carrying a leather briefcase. I felt totally at ease and went about my business in Milan. However, on the third night, my phone started exploding with notifications. My noise monitoring app was hitting the critical red zone, showing decibel levels consistent with a rock concert. I checked the Ring camera, and my heart dropped into my stomach. Mrs. H was nowhere to be seen. Instead, there was a literal parade of luxury SUVs and sports cars pulling into my driveway. Dozens of teenagers, maybe 50 or 60 of them, were streaming into my front door. They were carrying crates of expensive champagne, bags of fast food, and what looked like a professional DJ setup. I tried calling the number on the booking immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I messaged the guest through the app, demanding an explanation and telling them the party had to end immediately. No response. I watched through the camera as a kid who couldn't have been older than 17 used a permanent marker to draw on my custom-painted foyer walls. I felt sick. I called the local police department, but they told me that since it was a private residence and I wasn't there to sign a complaint in person, they could only send a car to tell them to turn the music down unless there was visible violence. By the time the police arrived, the kids just turned the lights off and stayed quiet until the patrol car left. Then the bass started thumping even harder. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of pure panic, watching my security feed intermittently, until someone literally threw a sweater over the camera. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise. It meant they were doing things I couldn't see. I was thousands of miles away, trapped in a hotel room in Milan, watching my life's work being dismantled in real time. I didn't sleep. I just paced the room, imagining the worst. I thought about my hand-woven Persian rugs, my collection of first edition books, and the custom-stained oak cabinets that I had spent 6 months perfecting. Every notification on my phone felt like a physical blow to my chest. I tried calling Mrs. H again and again, but the calls were blocked. I contacted Airbnb support, but they told me they had to verify the situation, and it would take 24 to 48 hours for a safety team to intervene. I was helpless. I felt like I was watching a slow-motion car crash involving everything I loved. I eventually booked the first flight I could find, which wasn't for another 12 hours. The flight back was a blur of anxiety and caffeine. I kept refreshing social media, searching for my own address as a hashtag. That's when I saw it. A video titled Project X, Elite Edition, featured a group of boys using my expensive kitchen island as a slip-and-slide with dish soap and vodka. I saw a girl, who I later found out was a senator's niece, using my silk curtains to wipe up a spilled drink. The disrespect was visceral. It wasn't just a party, it was a performance of power. These kids knew exactly whose house they were in, and they didn't care because they were raised to believe that everything in the world was disposable as long as they had the cash to replace it. When the plane finally touched down, I didn't even go to baggage claim. I took an Uber straight to my house. The neighborhood was quiet, which was an eerie contrast to the chaos I had seen on my screen. As the car pulled up, I saw the first signs of the disaster. My manicured lawn was shredded by tire tracks. There were cigarette butts floating in my decorative fountain. I walked up to the front door, and it was unlocked. Not just unlocked, but slightly ajar, as if they couldn't even be bothered to pull it shut on their way out. The smell hit me first. It wasn't just the smell of a party, it was the smell of decay. Stale beer, cheap cigars, and the metallic tang of vomit. My foyer, which I had designed to be a place of calm and elegance, looked like a war zone. There were footprints on the walls. Actualmente footprints. I walked into the living room and felt the crunch of glass under my feet. My $5,000 white velvet sofa was ruined, soaked through with what looked like a mixture of red wine and energy drinks. Someone had used a knife to carve their initials into the side of my mahogany coffee table. I moved to the kitchen, and my heart shattered. The marble countertops were chipped, and there were literal burn marks on the surface. They had apparently decided to do flaming shots directly on the stone. But the worst was yet to come. I walked toward my private office, the one room that was explicitly off-limits in the house rules. The heavy oak door had been kicked in with such force that the frame was splintered. This was where I kept my personal archives, my portfolio, and the few heirlooms I had left from my family. My grandmother's 1920s floor lamp, a delicate piece of Art Deco history that survived the Great Depression and 2 house moves, was lying in the corner in 3 pieces. They hadn't just knocked it over, they had snapped the brass neck of the lamp. I sat down on the floor in the middle of the mess and just cried. I didn't cry because of the money. I cried because of the violation. It felt like someone had reached into my soul and decided to spit on it. I spent the next 6 hours documenting every single detail. I took over 400 photos. I recorded video walkthroughs of every room. I called the police again, and this time, because I was there and the damage was clearly over the felony threshold, they actually sent a forensics team. The officer looked at the state of the house and just shook his head. "I've seen drug dens that look better than this, ma'am," he said. That was the moment my sadness turned into a cold, hard diamond of rage. I wasn't going to be the nice lady who accepts an insurance check. I was going to be the person who taught these children that the world has teeth. I finally got a hold of Mrs. H. Her name was actually Helena, and she was the wife of a major venture capitalist. When she finally answered, her voice was dripping with condescension. "Sarah, please," she sighed, as if I was the one being an inconvenience. "I've already told Airbnb I'd pay for a cleaning service. Just send the invoice to my assistant. I don't see why you're calling me at dinner time." I told her, "Helena, your son and his friends didn't just make a mess. They committed felony vandalism. They broke into a locked room. They destroyed irreplaceable antiques." She laughed. She actually laughed. "Oh honey, everything has a price. Just name your number and stop being so dramatic. My Julian is a good boy, he's just high-spirited. He's going to Yale in the fall, so let's not do anything silly that might jeopardize that, okay? I'll have my lawyer send you a non-disclosure agreement and a check for $20,000. That should more than cover your little antiques." So that's the situation I was in. I was standing in the ruins of my home with a woman who thought her money made her exempt from basic human decency. She thought she could buy my silence and my dignity for $20,000. She thought her son's high-spirited nature was more important than the laws of the land. I had 2 choices. I could take the $20,000, fix the sofa, buy a new lamp, and go back to my life. Or, I could make sure these kids and their parents learned a lesson they'd never forget. I could show them that even in a world of wealth, there are some things you can't buy your way out of. Before I tell you the absolute chaos I unleashed on them, and how I used their own viral videos to ruin their perfect reputations, I want you to pause. This is a long story, And it gets much more intense from here. Go down to the comments right now and tell me. What would you have done? Would you have taken the money and moved on? Or would you have gone for total scorched earth revenge? Do you think Helena's attitude is typical of people in her position? Or did I just get unlucky with a particularly bad guest? I want to see your thoughts before I reveal the plan I hatched in that ruined office. I didn't take the money. In fact, I didn't even reply to her lawyer's email. Instead, I went into design mode. But this time, I wasn't designing a room. I was designing a downfall. I realized that these families lived in a very specific bubble of private schools, country clubs, and corporate boards. In that bubble, reputation is everything. Money is common, but class and integrity are the currencies they use to stay on top. I decided to devalue their currency. I spent the next week doing something I call digital archaeology. I went back to those TikToks and Instagram stories. Most of them had been deleted once the kids realized I was back, but they weren't gone. I had already screen recorded everything. I used AI facial recognition software, a tool I sometimes use for identifying furniture styles in old photos, to match the faces in the videos to the digital yearbooks of the 3 most expensive private schools in the state. I didn't just find Julian. I found the daughter of a local senator. I found the son of a tech billionaire who was currently in the middle of a massive IPO. I found the niece of a woman who sat on the board of the very museum where I had done some of my best design work. I created a press kit. That's the only way to describe it. It was a beautifully formatted digital file. It started with the before photos of my house, the ones that had been featured in architectural magazines. Then it transitioned into the during footage. I edited the kids' own videos together. I synced the sound of them laughing and cheering to the visual of my grandmother's lamp being snapped. I included the audio of Helena telling me, "Everything has a price." Then I showed the after photos, the vomit, the bleach, the carved wood, the broken glass. I didn't send it to the parents. I sent it to the schools. I sent it to the dean of admissions at Yale, Stanford, and Princeton. The schools these kids were bragging about attending in their social media bios. I sent it to the ethics and compliance departments of the parents' companies. I included a cover letter from a high-powered attorney friend of mine, stating that a criminal investigation was underway, and that these individuals were being named as primary suspects in a felony vandalism case. The reaction was like a nuclear explosion. The first call came from the senator's office. They didn't offer me money. They offered me favors. They tried to tell me that the senator wasn't aware of his niece's behavior, and that it would be in everyone's best interest to handle this quietly. I told them, the time for quiet was when I was calling the police from Italy while your niece was bleaching my rugs. Now it's time for the loud part. Then came the schools. St. Jude's Academy, the most prestigious school in the area, has a zero-tolerance policy for criminal behavior. They were in a bind. If they ignored the video, they would look like they were protecting criminals. If they acted, they would lose some of their biggest donors. But because I had sent the video to the local news stations at the same time, the story was already out. A local journalist saw the elite mansion party angle and ran with it. It became the lead story on the 6 o'clock news. The mansion wreckers became a meme. People started identifying the kids in the comments, tagging their parents' businesses. The tech billionaire whose son was in the video saw his company's stock drop 2% in a single day because of the PR nightmare surrounding his family's values. It was beautiful. But I wasn't done. I pushed for the criminal charges. The DA's office, sensing the public's hunger for rich kids getting what they deserve, decided to make an example of them. Julian and 4 of his closest friends were charged with felony vandalism and breaking and entering. Because I had the video evidence of them kicking in the office door, there was no way out. They couldn't claim it was an accident. The day of the court hearing was one of the most satisfying days of my life. I walked into that courtroom wearing my best professional suit. I looked like the successful, hard-working woman I am. On the other side of the room were the 14 kids, and their phalanx of expensive lawyers. They looked miserable. Julian wasn't high-spirited anymore. He was pale, shaking, and wouldn't look me in the eye. Helena was there, too, but she wasn't laughing. She looked like she had aged 10 years in a week. Her husband had been forced to take a leave of absence from his firm because the scandal was too much for their clients. During the hearing, I was asked to give a victim impact statement. I didn't talk about the money. I talked about the 1920s lamp. I talked about how my house wasn't just an asset. It was a sanctuary I had built with my own hands after a decade of grinding. I talked about the arrogance it takes to look at someone else's life and decide it's your playground. The judge was a no-nonsense woman who had clearly seen enough affluenza cases for one lifetime. She sentenced the 5 primary offenders to 500 hours of community service, specifically cleaning up graffiti and public parks. She also ordered them to pay full restitution, which, after my lawyers finished calculating the emotional distress and the loss of business income, came to nearly $300,000. But the real punishment was the record. These kids now have a felony on their record that cannot be expunged for at least 7 years. Yale revoked Julian's admission. The other universities followed suit. They weren't going to touch those kids with a 10-foot pole. Helena tried to corner me in the hallway after the sentencing. "You happy now?" she hissed. "You've ruined their lives. They have no futures." I looked at her and said, "No, Helena. I didn't ruin their lives. I gave them a reality check. They still have their health, they still have your money, and they still have a roof over their heads. They just have to work for things now, like the rest of us. Maybe if you'd taught them that 10 years ago, we wouldn't be here." The aftermath was long and complicated. It took nearly a year to get the house back to its original state. I had to hire specialized restorers for the wood and the marble. I tracked down a similar 1920s lamp, though it'll never be the one my grandmother held. But throughout the process, I felt a sense of peace. I had reclaimed my space. I had proven that being rich doesn't mean you're untouchable. I eventually sold that house. I couldn't live there anymore. The memories of the violation were too thick in the air. I bought a new place, even more beautiful, and this time, it's not on Airbnb. It's just for me. Sometimes I see Julian's name in the news, not for anything good. He's been in and out of trouble, unable to handle a world where people tell him no. I don't feel bad for him. I feel like the world is finally balanced. Looking back at this whole mess, I've realized that people will treat you exactly how you allow them to. If I had taken the $20,000, I would have been telling Helena and Julian that my life was for sale. By refusing the money and demanding justice, I set a price they couldn't pay. It was a long, exhausting, and expensive battle, but I would do it again in a heartbeat. I learned that my stuff wasn't as important as my self-respect. I hope this story serves as a warning to anyone who thinks they can use other people as stepping stones. The higher you are, the harder you fall when someone finally pulls the rug out from under you. And trust me, I'm very good at pulling rugs, especially when they're my rugs. If you think I did the right thing by holding those entitled brats accountable and making sure their viral party had real-world consequences, make sure to like this video. It helps the story reach more people who might be going through something similar. If you think I went too far or that I was being too vengeful, tell me why in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to see where you draw the line between justice and revenge. Do you think I should have taken the money? Subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stories of people standing up for themselves against those who think they're untouchable. I have plenty more stories from my years as a designer and a host, and believe me, this wasn't the only time someone tried to take advantage of my hard work. Share your own horror stories if you've ever dealt with rich kid, entitlement, or an Airbnb guest from hell. I'll be responding to your thoughts in the comments section. I'll see you all in the next story.